Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us today from wherever you happen to be for today's webinar on operationalizing work from home support. Hopefully everyone in your family and everyone you know is happy and healthy, both now and in the future. We had a webinar a few weeks back when all this started to help guide everyone on things they should be thinking about when setting up the work from home environments. And so now that everyone is set up, we thought it made sense to circle back and talk about what we should be doing now that to ensure that those environments are indeed secure and well supported. My name is Aris Demosthenes. I'm the training content manager here at SolarWinds MSP, and I will be your host for this webinar. But before I introduce our expert panelists, of course, we need to go through the obligatory housekeeping slide. So first things first, yes, this is being recorded. It will be posted to both our COVID hub and to YouTube as fast as we can edit the recording. We're putting the link to the COVID hub right now in the chat window for you, for those of you who might not know what it is, okay? Second, we have muted all the lines, but only to ensure a cleaner audio experience for the audience, okay? It doesn't mean we don't want you to communicate with us. Please feel free to ask as many questions as you like, but please use the question panel on the right rather than the chat window. Okay, the chat window doesn't get saved after. We can't respond to questions that we might not have gotten to. So please put all of your comments and questions in the question panel instead. We'll get to as many of them as we can during the broadcast. Okay, bandwidth is getting better, but if you happen to be having any broadcast issues or audio or video issues, please let us know in the question panel as well. Okay, now with that out of the way, let's introduce our panel. Today, we're joined by the SolarWinds Head Nerds to discuss this topic from each of their areas of expertise. Okay, these guys are non-quota carrying. Okay, their job is simply to provide you guys with expert advice on their particular topic. Okay, with the ultimate goal of helping you guys get to the next level, whatever that happens to look like for you. So I suggest highly that you attend any sessions they create for you. Tweet them on their social handles. We'll put that in the chat window as well for you, so that you guys have all that ready to hand, because the stuff that they're creating for you is really focused on your success. So let's introduce them all. Gil Langston is our head security nerd and brings with him years of experience in the security space from both a sales and a product management background. Our head automation nerd, Marc-Andre Tanguay, has been pushing the automation boundary in our products and in the space, and is responsible for many of the objects, pardon me, as that you'll leverage in the automation engine in both of our platforms. Eric Anthony is an ex-MSP owner himself and uses that real-world experience to help guide us through the operational questions that we have. And last, but definitely never least, is Eric Harless, our head backup nerd, who similarly to Gil, has a ton of industry experience in both sales and product management, specifically in the data protection and recovery space. Welcome, gentlemen, and thank you for joining me today.
Great to be here.
Now, before I start asking these fine gentlemen to provide us with their valuable insights and advice in each of their topics, I'd like to start by polling the audience. Okay, so we would like to know what you're seeing in terms of ticket volume. Do you find that you're seeing more tickets, less tickets? Is everything staying about the same? We see, what we see in the world of social media is that is one thing, but those are all anonymous. So we'd really like to know how our customers are being affected directly. This will help us understand, what more we can do to support you moving forward, and also, help frame today's conversation a bit. All right, I'm going to close that poll and share that with everybody here. Can everybody see that? Guys, can you confirm you see it? My screen isn't changing for some reason.
Yes, we can.
Yep. Okay, great. So we're seeing almost half of the audience have fewer tickets than before, which is kind of in line with what we're reading online as well. All right, let's move forward here. And oops, pardon me, guys. That was my bad there. So let's get going with our panelists here. We were caught off guard by what happened, as an industry. We worked incredibly fast to get all the work from home users set up. Speed was obviously the most important thing in that situation, but speed typically leads to missteps. So having all of our users all over the place rather than at the office, and knowing that the bad guys have always, worked from home themselves, well, that kind of puts us at a disadvantage and leaves us more vulnerable than ever. So I'd like to start with our head security nerd, Gil Langston. Gil, now that our partners um, have their end users all set up, what should they be reviewing and or implementing to help create more secure work from home environments?
Hey, thanks a lot, Eris. I really appreciate it. And based on the feedback, I would say that we're hearing from you some of the same things that we're hearing out in the industry. That a lot of you do have fewer tickets now than before. There was, as Eris said, there was this mad rush to kind of get everybody set up. That means supplying them with either remote access or making sure that they're able to work at home. In our first webcast, we talked a little bit about some of the things to consider as you do that from a security standpoint. But it's very likely that the reality is that the first week or two was all about making sure that they were connected, that they were able to do business, all of those line of business applications, so that we could keep these guys moving, right? So it's very possible that you probably had to cut a few corners on some of the security considerations, and there was a new security consideration, and that's the users at home. So I would say now it's really time to take stock of what we have going on, what the landscape is like out there, and what kind of things should we be focusing on now to make sure that all of our users can work securely. And if we go on to the next slide there, um, unfortunately, having everybody at home now kind of presents this elevated risk that we weren't used to before. A lot of these people are not used to working from home, right? They're when they come home, they act one way. When they're at work, they act another way. They're probably a little more lax in a home environment when it comes to security mindfulness. So that's something that's really concerning. But also, there's an unknown security posture that we're dealing with. In a couple of my webcasts, I called it that hostile environment now, which is the Wi-Fi and all of the things that have to do with the home environment that the users are working in. And I recently put out a blog as well about the opportunistic actors and how they were going to be ramping up some of those things. So I think we've got a few links here that we'll put into the chat for this slide around those. And one of those is that blog post that I wrote. I definitely encourage you guys to take a look at that, because a lot of it is proving to be true. In fact, I just received some stats from our MailAssure team, where they're essentially stating that they've seen in the past few weeks 80% increase in phishing and malware, a lot of it related to COVID. Um, I think they said they're blocking somewhere around 10 million email messages a week since this thing started. So things have definitely increased in the opportunistic nature of these people trying to get somebody to click on something because they know they're working at home. And that's pretty concerning because of the unknown security posture, and sometimes they may be using their own devices. So that does actually prevent some challenges there that I think we should all take a look at, and then work with the end users and the businesses to make sure that we're actually reinforcing the security posture at home. And on that next slide there, you'll see that we have a few questions and conversations that you should probably be having if you didn't from the beginning. Now kind of revisit, did they secure the Wi-Fi, or do they even know as an end user what secure Wi-Fi really means? A lot of people may have an open network, things like that, which presents a lot of risk. And that device itself, is it being used securely? Are they doing the right things from a process and procedure standpoint? And the security measures they may have. Look, you may be managing some of these systems. They may be work laptops or loaners that you sent out, or they may be their own systems that they're using to access cloud resources or use remote access. Are the security measures on that actual device? Is there endpoint protection installed? Are they patching the systems? And finally, there's a lot of news going on, and people are trying to find a lot of information about what's happening, but are they really up to date when it comes to what's going on out there, and what kind of threats are coming? So the the articles that were in that last slide do talk about some of those. The blog that was posted talks about some of those. And we're also working on some materials pending legal approval and agreement that we'll be able to supply you, that will let you send those to the end users to talk about some of these threats and what they can do. So keep your eye on the resource hub for that. And those are some things that will help you out. Now, let's talk about the Wi-Fi security that we had on that last slide for a minute. There are a few things that I would recommend that you spend some time, if you do have with your end users, to make sure that they understand, and you may need to assist them with this, right? Like I said, they may not know. So verify that they do have a good complex password that's WPA2 security or higher on the connection itself. But also make sure that they have a good password on the administration page. This is something a lot of people miss because they ship with the admin default credentials. Also, I've seen on quite a few routers, home routers, where the remote administration is turned on, which is a security risk because people can access that router from out in the world. So make sure that that remote administration is turned off. But also advise them to make a run through maybe one night and make sure some of the other devices are updated. People are they're pretty bad about skipping a lot of those updates when they pop up on the devices, but advise them, all the other systems, the phones, the laptops, the other computers and workstations, make sure that they're updated as well. That has a much better security standpoint when it comes to dealing with all those. Now, I want to show you guys this. This is actually a screenshot of my router when I last, I flashed it, reset it to its default state. And when I logged in to the router itself, I realized that my firmware was not set up to auto update. So I changed that to auto update. So these are things that you may not only want to advise your end users on, but you may want to assist them with that, because it's likely they don't quite understand how to access an administration page from inside their network. So for example, have one of your service desk team remote in and assist them with this, right? Remote into one of the machines. You can use the a take control or any remote control tool that you have to actually do a remote assistance. And then once you're on that system, help them get everything set up and secure. I think that's going to go a long way towards adding value and making sure that the users have now processes and policies that they can use in the future. But also have that discussion about other safe practices, right? So one of the things that we talked about in the first webcast, and I think Marc-Andre is going to talk a little bit about some automation around this later, but make sure you have a work-only user setup with just the work apps, right? Not all the other stuff that people have installed. That's a little more secure environment, even if they are using a remote tool to remote into another system from that. That is a more secure way to operate. Make sure that they are updating the operating system and apps. Now, if you have an agent or if they've agreed to have an agent installed, then you have the ability to update and patch those systems. But if not, make sure they are patching that work device as well. But also things like remote sessions, VPN, make sure that they're disconnecting from those when they're not needed. There's no need to have a connection into a corporate resource when it's not in use. Also, make sure if you do have a VPN client or something, have those settings, have it auto disconnect after it's idle for a certain period of time. Those will help reduce the amount of risk, but also log out of the system when they're not using it. During this time, they really should be using that system for work only and not sharing it with a lot of other people who may be visiting websites, clicking on links, accessing their personal email, kind of increasing the risk of the possibility of an infection, or then from there jumping into a corporate asset or stealing credentials, something along those lines. So now let's go ahead and move on here and talk about those people themselves. So, right, we talked about the device and what they should be doing, but what should they as a person be doing? Make sure that they understand that there is an increase in the email scams, the threats that are out there. A lot of people taking advantage of people's desire to find information. Avoid that personal business, checking email, doing random browsing on a system they're using for work, even if it's a personal one, during this time. Of course, the usual stuff, right? Don't open attachments you didn't request. If you receive an email, look at the from field very closely, because sometimes the email address doesn't match the display name, and that's something that could be a hint of something like CEO fraud or a phishing email. Obviously, don't click on links you don't recognize. And one of the things I always say here is if you receive an email you think is from World Health Organization, something like that, instead Google that and go to the site through different means. If you receive a mail that looks like it's from another employee, but it says urgent, I need you to buy these gift cards or pay this invoice, contact them through secondary means, chat, phone call. Did you send this email? Because a lot of the scammers are actually using that now to get fraudulent invoices paid. And when in doubt, maybe you should have a customer actually send you a copy, an end user send you a copy, or create a ticket for you to review. Because if you see something that starts to look like a trend, you should likely then send something out to those end users and say, we're seeing an uptick in this type of email. Make sure you avoid them. So that's how you can help add value and let these users be more secure in their environment. I do want to address something that we've heard from some partners, is that they're being reached out to by the businesses and saying, hey, we need to start dropping some services, fall back to another level. One thing that you should really have that discussion with the customer, if that happens, is that there is really a minimum level of core security that you should be providing for these systems, right? Now, if they have their own device, making sure they have their own endpoint protection updated, that's fine, or supplying your own. But that mail protection, which is going to block all of the scams we talked about, the web protection, so if they do click on a link, those can be blocked, right? So they're not actually downloading, and then keeping the systems patched. Those are all super critical during this time to make sure that no matter what you do, you don't fall below those core protections in an environment. A couple other things to think about here before we move on to some other topics. You may have a lot of home users still using Windows 7, and as you know, they stopped the free updates for those in January. That was the last round, and if you don't have ESU, then you don't get updates, and home users obviously are not doing that. So they're getting further and further away from a secure standpoint each month as more patches come out. So consider other options for these, even if it's temporary, right? There are a lot of offers out there that I think Eric's going to review later, that can allow you to spool up some virtual desktops, or you could give them remote access to another secure system to do their work. But doing that day-to-day work, checking emails and stuff, is going to be a lot safer if they're on a system that's fully patched and patchable. But a couple of reminders too, guys. Don't forget, you still got your business networks to take care of. At some point, people are coming back into the office, so that has to be part of the normal day-to-day. Make sure that office is ready for them to move back into, and everything is patched up and ready to go. Take that opportunity to, if you needed some extended downtime on a few items, then you can go ahead and get those updates installed and get everything set up. We talked about this earlier, but if you've spooled up a new, for example, software-based VPN, remote desktop gateway, or something that is new in the environment, don't forget to add that into your processes and procedures to keep updated. You want to make sure that as security updates come out, you're seeing a lot of those. I mean, talk about Zoom and the way they've been putting out a lot of updates. So as security issues get discovered during this time, people are going to be putting out a lot of updates. So make sure that you're adding all of those into your plans and your processes. And another thing to consider, if you had users who were not using two-factor authentication widely, this is a great time to set it up. I mean, if you're using Azure AD or something, it's built in. This would be a great time to get that configured, not only to add security now, but then to have that enhanced protection of account security moving forward from this time. So those are kind of some of the core considerations that you should be having during this time. I do want to mention, I did just post a 3-part series about these discussions, 5-minute videos each. They're on the Resource Hub. Feel free to take a look at those, and we discuss these topics in a little bit more detail.
Yeah, those are some great points, Gil. Thanks for that. Now, the truth is we've never been in a more vulnerable spot as an industry, right? And that, coupled with the fact that the bad guys are not going to stop, rather increase their effort, as Gil just showed us, means it would be very unprofessional for us, and maybe even irresponsible of the MSP community to not do at least what you've shown here as the bare minimum today to protect those customers by securing their work from home users. And the first point on this slide here in regards to Windows 7 actually leads me directly into my second poll, which I will launch right now. Looking to figure out, what are you guys seeing? How are you guys supporting those work from home users that are still running those legacy operating systems? Like Windows 7, for example. Are you supporting as is and securing as best as you can? Or are you giving them remote access? With RDP VPN to a more secure system? Are you spooling up virtual desktops for temporary use? Are you supplying them with temporary loaner systems, right? It's one thing to plan a project with one of your customers and budget for equipment and software refreshes and updates. But when you're dealing with users working from home, you can't expect them to buy new assets. So what do, right? We got a little more time here. I want to wait for a couple more people to chime in here. All right, that's good. Time to close that poll. Really interesting. Share that. Tell me, you guys see? There we go. 40% of them are supporting as is, and 30% are giving them remote access. So those are the two main things that we're seeing. So maybe that leads us into another video, guys. We'll talk about that offline for everybody. But maybe we can put a little something together and maybe even create a little end user documentation like Gil is working on to help in those areas.
And I'd like to speak to that for a second, if you don't mind, Eris.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
I do cover some of those topics in one of those videos on the Resource Hub, and it was pretty much what I'm hearing from a lot of service providers in the industry. So when you're supporting as is and securing the best you can, it's important to make sure that this is where you might want to have that conversation about maybe I should have one of my RMM agents, my remote support agents on the device so that I can patch it and then discuss whether or not they have current endpoint protection and possibly use your own during this time. Obviously, your mileage may vary. It depends on the users, but making sure that you at least can assist them in securing where they're doing work is pretty critical.
Yeah, and with that, I'd like to bring in our head automation nerd, Marc-Andre Tanguay, at this point. Marc, how would you identify underperforming systems, and what would you do to support them?
Yeah, so underperforming systems is something that I've had a few people reach out to me since this whole series of events started, and they were saying that they're getting a lot more complaint than usual about the PCs being slow and things like that. So it kind of drove me into how can we be proactive about this and how can we leverage our tools to find those systems. And then obviously after that we're going to go into what can we do. But initially speaking, like, you want to find these machines, and through your RMM or your remote control tool, whatever you're using, you have the ability to find things that will show you some of what's happening, right? Like, you'll find high CPU trends. If you find a machine that is constantly throttling and the CPU is constantly at its max, something could be wrong either with the machine itself or with the user's behavior. So either or, something is wrong that we should look into. Even though it might be a desktop, this gives you visibility into that. The next item would be looking at RAM capacity. If you still find older machines with really low memory, either 4 gigs or sometimes 8 gigs, and some machines not even enough, depending on what apps you use, you want to be careful and you want to find these things to make your life easier to be able to support your customers. You also want to find that the machines are having RAM overuse. So even though they may have a 4 gig or 12 gigs of RAM, if you find a lot of apps that are overusing RAM, this might become a problem. In the case of work from home PCs, you'll have a lot of launchers and different things in the background. A good example of you'll find on PCs is there's more and more, for example, game launchers, being Steam, GOG, Ubisoft. There's like 5 or 6 different ones now out there, and between all of these different things, they consume resource, they consume RAM, they consume CPU, they auto update in the background, they do all kind of things, and these things will cause problems for business application because they compete for resource. It's pretty simple. So you will be able to find underperforming systems by looking at these type of trends. Obviously, hard drive latency, not so much an issue in newer machines because most everybody has moved to SSDs, and that is usually taking the problem away from you. But on older machines, the work from home PCs, the whatever people have at home at the moment, you'll have a mix of everything. So you will find those data points. Obviously, you want to look into the tickets as well. You'll see people send you tickets to say, I'm having a problem with my machine, it's slow, this and that. and then you're stuck helping them. So you want to be able to find these machines proactively as much as you can. And here's a couple reports on the that I've pulled out of our different RMMs to show you what you can do. So this is what it looks like in then Central. You can do multiple services at the same time. Then you can just see if any of them don't have a high availability, it means that they're going failed a lot, or failed or warning. And then you can see that information. This is just some different VMs I use so you can see what the trends are. And then you can obviously know what's happening. In RMM, it's a little different. You can go and get some data dumps and then just play with it in Excel and very quickly get that information as well. So both will give you that information. And no matter what RMM you use, no matter what platform you use, you should have the ability to export that data and see that. So now once you identify these systems, you want to do a few things to help, right? Like you want to help them get a work system set up if they have not already. In the previous poll, you guys said you're trying to supply them with temporary loaners. It might be another option that you may want to do. You may want to supply them something to help them be more functional. We're still in the first wave of this whole situation. During that, we're seeing it stabilize where people now are settling into their environments. But as this moves into back and forth, this is going to be tricky, and you want to have the information available. You want to be able to give them systems to show your value. You also want to offer them to connect to work systems. So to the last poll's point, a lot of people are giving them RDP or things like that. You want to give them the ability to remote control their work PC. This is good from a security standpoint because you take away the local PC security flaws. Well, not everything, but a lot of it, by at least having them log into a work PC and working through that PC instead of locally with their files. So this helps you remove that component. It also removes a lot of performance issues. My wife is doing that right now. She's in the government and she has to come and connect to her work PC from a home computer, and she's able to work just like if she would be in the office. At least it gives her something to work through. So that might be an option if your customers have that ability through VPN and connecting in. You can also run system maintenance to try and optimize those devices. If you've installed the RMM on it, which hopefully you did, you'll be able to get information and then, stop application of undesirable programs. So if you know like 8 to 5, you shouldn't use all those game launchers. You shouldn't use all these different updaters and different things. You can just kill those off and leave all that stuff for after hours so that at least they perform properly. You can clean temp folders and whatever else you may need to do. There's a ton of things you can do. In previous webinars, we've gone through examples of this. So definitely recommend you look in the automation cookbook. I think it is posted in the chat right now, so you can look at it and see what's available, and obviously reach out to us if you need more created.
Okay, that's good advice for making the best of the systems they already have. But what do you do if you identify that hardware has failed and needs to be replaced in this environment? So to answer that question, I'd like to ask Eric Anthony, our head operations nerd, to step in.
Thanks, Harris. Yeah, so there's a couple of things you can do. Obviously, if hardware fails, something physical is going to have to happen, right? But the overall goal here is to make sure that the customer can be up and working as quickly as possible. So the first thing that we want to look for is there a different device in their household that they could, spin up with your help, making sure it's secure, again, covering all those things that Gil and Marc-Andre just covered. But that would be the fastest way to get them back up and running, right? Prepare some loaners. I know a lot of MSPs and IT service providers that I've talked to personally have taken their cache of old laptops and done whatever they can to fix them up, to make them simply machines that they can access the web or do a remote access into a work machine, something like that. Make sure that if you do that, though, you're either shipping them or you're doing some type of no contact handoff to keep both you and the customer safe. You can help them order and drop ship a replacement. There still are some, stock available out there. It's getting scarce, but it is available. And if and when an on-site visit becomes absolutely necessary or critical because a server goes down or something like that, where the stuff that they're trying to access needs to be repaired, please make sure that you're practicing social distancing, you're scheduling it after hours to limit your exposure. I know using hand sanitizer helps, wearing gloves, and a lot of you have recommended bringing your own keyboard and mouse. This is actually an excellent idea and pretty simple to do in this day and age of remote, USB wireless keyboards and mice, or even a combined keyboard with a trackpad in it is a great solution for this. And then no matter what, make sure you're following the CDC, WHO, or whatever government guidelines, laws, orders you're subject to in your area to make sure we're keeping everybody safe.
Yeah, do everything you can to not go on site and be extremely careful when you can't avoid it. Is the gist there? Well done, Eric. I mean, I really like the bring your own keyboard and mouse suggestion there. I didn't even occur to me until you said it just now, and I was like,
Yeah, we actually used to do this during flu season when I was in MSP. We had these little Logitech USB keyboards that had a built-in trackpad. They were small, portable, easy to carry around, and I believe they're still available.
yeah, it was like the fourth door of a minivan. It should have been there all along. Anyway,
Absolutely.
but one of the biggest trends right now that we're seeing at all levels of the industry, actually, from the SMB space all the way up into enterprise, is that people are starting to solve the problem by moving more of the infrastructure, applications, and such to the cloud. So at this point, I'd like to turn it over to our head backup nerd, Eric Harless, to walk us through some of those considerations. Eric?
Thanks, Eris, Mark, Gil, Eric. It's been good hearing the feedback that you guys have had, and you've alluded to a lot of things. Move to a virtual environment, remote in, replace that slow hardware. So there's a lot of options that exist for our MSP partners right now, and I'm sure that you guys are being asked that how do you solve these freezes, or how do we get this video conference to work? And the businesses that you support are starting to demand better solutions to get over some of these technology hurdles. And moving to the cloud might be the answer, but it's not necessarily always the first answer to go after. Obviously, any move to the cloud could facilitate a move back from the cloud. So we want you to think about that long and hard before you make those moves and make intelligent moves. Those users that are using those work laptops right now, for instance, they're going to have much different problems to solve than those that are using the personal systems. The patching, the security aspects, as we've alluded to. Now, it's also the applications that your customers are using, their industry, how they access their data, where they store their data. All that's going to influence their ability to make things, or your ability to make things better in their organization. So start to inventory what they're using, their proprietary applications, any specialty data that might not be feasible to push out to the cloud, either due to cost, complexity, or maybe even regulatory compliance that says, no, this can't be in a public environment. So it's that communication that's going to be another key factor in getting work from home to be successful. Collaboration, you can definitely take advantage of these external tools that are available if their particular industry and their type of communication methodologies allow it. There's no reason for a user to have to open a VPN connection into their office if all they're going to be doing is communicating through a collaboration platform to talk to other employees. Let them work externally. Utilize a split connection VPN that would allow you to do that. If they're just connecting to get the file shares, there's other options. Put that data out on the cloud someplace, in a SharePoint, in a repository, in OneDrive, so that they can access it without opening up that VPN connection and bringing the network, corporate network, to its knees. Now, CAD users, video editors, graphic designers, we've got some of those internally as well. Hopefully they've already got their own laptops, their own MacBooks, their own professional systems with discrete graphics that can do this work remotely. You really don't want architects connecting into the office so they can remotely work on those really large files and constantly pushing files up and down as they save. So those are some things to look at and consider. It's going to boil down to bandwidth in many cases. Either the user doesn't have enough, or there's not enough to handle concurrent connections at the office. Find that bottleneck. Try to offload to the cloud, but don't force everything through that Office VPN. Consider maybe some temporary increases to bandwidth, both office and at the end user sites. Maybe they can help alleviate. Find the bottleneck. Make sure that the user is not using that VPN all the time. I think Gil alluded to this one a little bit. Maybe it means you're going to do that split tunneling. Like I said, you're going to do different scheduled backup times, things along that nature. So lots of things to think about before you make that move, or before you tell your customer, yeah, we can move to the cloud. That'll solve all your problems. Not always the case. But if you are going to do that, let's talk about what the additional options or considerations would be. So as you move to the cloud, you want to think about this probably from a cost perspective, obviously, but think temporary versus permanent solutions. At some point, you are going to have to revert back. Just like you fell over in a business continuity and disaster recovery solution, you're going to fail back in a lot of cases here, getting customers working in the corporate office again. So look at your endpoints. You know, if you're going to consider virtual desktops or desktop as a service, you know, and those are really the same technologies. It's just a matter of how you license those. So a desktop as a service, you're going to pay a subscription, whether it be, you know, hourly, daily, monthly for a certain X number of resources, versus VDI, where you're going to build an infrastructure on hardware in your office or in a hosted provider. Same thing goes for infrastructure. On the infrastructure side, you're going to either spin up servers in a colo or you know, in the public cloud that you can access to offload it going through your corporate network. Obviously, spinning up something in a colo is going to be a little bit more expensive, a little bit more of an investment. Think about the temporary cloud solutions, and we'll talk about some free offers that are out there as well that can get you doing this without a lot of initial commitment up front. Applications are going to be key here, inventorying which applications your customers are using. Something as simple as collaboration. You know, Office 365 at the end customer level is going to give access to Office, to Teams, to OneDrive. That's going to solve some of the sharing, collaboration, and the application capabilities without having to redeploy a new machine in a lot of cases or open up that remote virtual desktop. On the server side, it could mean involving a migration of Exchange from on-premise into the cloud, moving data into a SharePoint site, those type of things. It's also, as I said, about connectivity. Connectivity could mean expanding out your AD to incorporate something like Azure Active Directory, or it could be just upgrading connectivity in the office or at the end user sites, or just addressing the usage so it's smarter. Once again, shutting off the VPNs when you're not using them, setting those smart limits so they automatically disconnect after 2-4 hours, those kind of things. So it's a little bit of education, if you will. And then, you know, finally, I've talked about, you know, the offers that are available. There's tons of free trials or extended trials, promotional offers out there, promotional offers out there. There's free Office 365, you know, at the E1 level. You can get it for up to 6 months. I've seen this for businesses. I've seen it for students and education levels. So look at their site, find out what offers are available that your customers could take advantage of. You want virtual desktop infrastructure? Amazon has got workspaces with a free tier that they've extended for a longer period of time, amongst other vendors as well. From a bandwidth perspective, there are regional broadband offers. There's some links that are going to get posted into the chat session here as well, where you can extend your bandwidth or you know, add bandwidth even if you don't have it, you know, fairly reasonable from your various providers. There's multiple free conferencing tools that are available. Some of these are offering support for free up until the end of the year. So look at those offers, find the ones that work. Don't put all of your eggs into one basket, however. Find a couple offers that'll work, because, you know, if you move all of your customers over to Zoom or any other tool, well, guess what? You're going to be loading that system more, and it's going to utilize more bandwidth, more of their resources. So spread it around a little bit. Finally, we do have a free Take Control Plus offer that's available. We'll talk more about it throughout the session. That'll give you access to our specific remote control tool. So lots of things out there. Look at the links, and if you find good stuff, please share them with us.
Great, Eric. Yeah, things to consider for sure. And a real warning about permanency there that needs to be thought through before you make any of these decisions, because, you know, the way you position it to the customer will definitely dictate how easy it'll be to roll it back once all this is said and done. And as luck would have it, that leads me perfectly into my next poll question, of course. It's like this is planned or something, guys. Are you guys seeing this trend as well? Have you seen an increased adoption of cloud resources and services with your customers? And if so, which type? Do you see them leveraging more infrastructure or more applications or both? Or have you already, you know, made the move for most of this stuff into the clouds for your customers, and it's not really a big deal, right? This trend seems to be a preferred option by CIOs in larger organizations as well. They've adjusted their IT budgets for the rest of the year to account for more movement to the cloud. So I'm very interested to see how this aligns to what our partners, you know, on the line here are seeing. And you know, the answers here might actually end up being another video we might consider, guys, as well, depending on what we see here. All right, that's just over 50% here of people answering. So let's close that poll and show what we see here. Very interesting to see that, you know, infrastructure isn't being really moved much. So I think that's why 1 and 3 are kind of low, but looks like applications are either moving or have already moved, I'm guessing, based on the answers here. So this movement is all about ensuring, both efficiency and security for the work from home user. But Mark, how can our partners leverage automation that exists in the tools that they already own to help them increase efficiencies also?
Yeah, so you want to use automation to make yourself more efficient and also more productive for your customers to be able to give them more value. A very simple thing, we mentioned it a little bit in the first webinars that we did a couple of weeks ago, is helping them making sure that they have their day-to-day tool. As you replace more PCs, because you're going to have to replace more and more as the time goes on for this, and you're going to need to make sure they have all their basic apps. Like a good example is what I've put on onto this slide is, having Adobe Reader, Google Chrome, Office 365, MS Office, whichever version they use, MS Teams or Skype or Slack or whatever chat tool they want to use. There's a variety of apps that you will want to deploy and maintain. Good example is to use the automation policy and the cookbook that we have for this. We've made it so that you can deploy a variety of apps by not even having to worry about the links. This is just easy. Even if you use just whatever tool, you can use automation to do these things. You can also build monitoring to standardize the environment to see do I have all these prerequisites on all my machines. So you can you don't have to wait for a support case 1-2 weeks down the road when they need Adobe Reader. The system can actually tell you like, hey, these 15 machines don't have Adobe Reader. Maybe you should do a self-healing or run a script or do something. I have a screenshot of that coming up, where I show an example of what the monitoring can look like, right? So in RMM and in Central, they look, somewhat similar. You can have it go normal or failed if you know what, I'm missing one of these critical apps. If that is the case, then do a self field to install it or send me a ticket so that someone can do it, like whatever the decision is. But even though they're own PCs or they're temporary PCs, you still need them to be up to par. And that is very important to give you guys quality into your delivery of service, and also to avoid support calls down the road saying like, oh, I'm missing Chrome, I'm missing Reader, I'm missing this and that, and whatever it is. At least you can make sure these things are there. And another thing that you can look into is doing training. There's a lot of good training available online, lynda.com. There's CBT trainings online. There's Microsoft will give some good ones too. But I've also seen more and more training pop up on Twitter, on LinkedIn, on different channels from MSPs saying, if you are working from home, if you never use Teams, come to this quick half an hour or an hour training on how to use it. This is something that a lot of people either charge for or offer for free to their customers. They will offer it for free to the masses. It's a good, I guess, marketing tool in a way, but it's also a good way to give value back at really no cost to you except for the labor. You take existing courses, you review them, you learn from them, you build your own, and then you can train. And a good one to train on is SharePoint Online. You want to train them to avoid keeping files locally on their machine. You want them to be kept in the cloud as much as you can to avoid any security issues like Gil talked early on. You want to use Teams for collaborating. A lot of people have never seen Teams. Now they're forced to use it because, they used to just look right and just nudge someone and like, hey, question. Now they actually have to use tools like Teams, Slack, you name it. There's a ton of them. But you can give him a quick little intro on this. There's tons of them right now that I'm seeing more and more pop up. You can also show them how to use OneDrive. Instead of saving my documents, save to OneDrive, or make sure that your profile is in OneDrive. At least, even it might be a personal OneDrive, it might be whatever, but at least it's saved somewhere. It's not ideal, but at least it's saved somewhere so that you don't lose data if the machine dies, because a lot of them are using older PCs, so it's important. Another example is training them to use WebEx, GoToMeeting, Zoom, things like that. We're seeing Zoom pop up a lot more recently. There's some security flaws with it, so I'm not going to say use or don't use it, but I see them more used. Good example, I've actually had a doctor's appointment and they did over Zoom a couple of weeks ago. And I was her first appointment using Zoom, and the lady had no idea what to do. So the doctor was on the phone. She's like, I'm supposed to use Zoom. I want to see what's happening, this and that, but I don't know what to do. So it became a funny conversation where I spent the first 10 minutes of the appointment showing her how to use Zoom. And because some third-party company gave her an account and created it for her, but didn't train her on it. So she got to using it, and she's like, I don't know what to do. She got lucky. She got somebody who's used it before, so I was able to give her a little review. She was very grateful and she moved on. But this is a missed opportunity for an MSP not training her properly and giving her the tools. Now, she obviously wasn't in a good place when she got on the phone with me. She was a little worried, and then she remembered I was in IT and I've been doing this for years, so blah blah blah. It was fine, but again, missed opportunity from that MSP space from not doing this and just sending, here's a link, have fun. So you want to leverage these things, you want to do these things yourself to show your value to your customers in those difficult times.
Excellent, Mark. Great advice there for sure. Leveraging automation and providing end user training are both good ways to create more efficiencies at the end user level. Now, let's bring in Eric Anthony and bring him back into the conversation now to help identify how we can drive efficiencies internally as well.
Yeah, and that's a great point, Eris. But I want to do one thing before we do that, because somebody asked the question about learning more about monitoring those applications that Mark just talked about. We're going to be having a boot camp next week on monitoring. So I wanted to go ahead and put that link in the chat. So I just did that, and Mark and I will be going through some of that in that boot camp, and that's a great place to ask those questions. Anyway, focusing on our client is obviously important, but sometimes we should turn inward and look at the challenges that this crisis has changed within our business. So let's talk about a couple of things that I'm seeing out there. Number one, there are a lot of unmanaged devices. You can't put your agent on everything. Your client doesn't want to pay for it, and sometimes it's more intrusive than it needs to be on an end user's device that doesn't belong to your actual customer. But you still need to provide remote support. You still need to get information off of that device. So we're going to talk a little bit about how you handle that situation. And then the other thing I want to talk about is keeping your techs productive through making sure that you have good communication and good escalation management. So when it comes to supporting these unmanaged devices, you want a remote support tool that offers you some type of endpoint agent license. And here's the reasoning behind that. Number one, most of the remote support tools allow you to have a customer call up, you give them a code, you tell them to go to a website, they type in the code, or they give you a code, however it works, and you guys get connected. Well, you can save all of that time if you know you're going to have to continue to support that device throughout this crisis by having a leave behind agent that you can leave on that device so that you can not only get connected to it quickly, but also have the option for unattended support as we go through this crisis. Now, a couple of other things that you want this remote support tool to have is a remote command line. So you can do things, look at things in the background without interrupting the end user, just like you would with your RMM tool. You want to be able to browse the registry, get system information and health, configuration and performance type of data. You want to be able to browse the event logs and look to see where that device is in terms of its Windows updates. So you want to look for a remote support tool that does this. Now, it just so happens that the Take Control Plus that we're offering for 90 days does actually do this. And so that's something you may want to look into. Now, if we change this to keeping techs productive, focusing on communication like I talked about, we want to make sure that they have a good chat tool. Now, a lot of you have Teams or Slack, and those are great tools for this because they replace those chair swivel conversations that you normally have in the office. A lot of us take for granted and we miss it in this work from home environment. Those chair swivel conversations that we have where we can just turn to the technician next to us or the manager in the office, that's only 10 steps away to get solutions or get answers to the questions that we have in regarding to supporting these customers. So you want to make sure that you have that type of conversation going on and that you're not just having your techs sit in these little silos in their home. You want to make sure you're having on-screen team meetings, preferably daily, just like developers have stand-up meetings every day. You want to make sure you're having those types of meetings to keep everyone on your tech team focused on the right work. Make sure that nobody's overlapping and that everybody has a good idea of the direction that you're going, especially with some of the bigger projects or higher critical items that your customers may be experiencing. Now, the other thing, and this is more from an HR standpoint, but it is going to affect your technician productivity, is make sure you're maintaining your weekly one-on-ones with every employee more often if you think it's needed. Now, a lot of you, I don't know, may not be doing one-on-ones. You can do some research. There's a lot of information on the internet about how to do them. They're relatively quick, and they provide two things primarily. Number one, it lets you know what the mindset of the technician is so that you can solve problems early. If they're having troubles working from home, if they are having issues with a loved one who, has a problem with the virus, you can, identify that and help out as quickly as possible. But also from a business standpoint, it also helps you to get them focused on the work that you intend them to do. And that's especially important in this work from home environment where you're not next to them or passing them in the hallways on an hourly or at least daily basis. And then lastly, spend time in your PSA. The tickets and the way they're moving through your PSA or ticketing system is extremely important. You want to make sure that they're being assigned properly, that they're being queued properly, and most of all, that they're moving through to completion at the rate you expect them to. And to further give a little bit more of a specific example of what we can do here in terms of efficiency and technician productivity is the idea of escalations. We talk about this in the efficiency bootcamp as well. You want to make sure that your right tickets get assigned to the right tech. We've met with MSPs who, for example, they only let tier 2 techs work on firewalls. So it doesn't do any good for a ticket to come in and then sit in tier 1 only for tier 1 to get to it and find out it needs to be escalated to tier 2. So you want to be able to escalate some of those tickets automatically. And if you don't, you want somebody like a triage specialist who's going to be able to look at these tickets before they go to tier 1 and go through them very quickly and automatically get that up to tier 2 as quickly as possible. Secondly, make sure you're using time limits to prevent tier 1 and tier 2 techs from holding up tickets. What I mean by this is a ticket goes into tier 1 and it sits there for say more than 30 minutes, and that tier 1 tech does not have a plan to resolution for that ticket. That means that that ticket needs to go up to tier 2. Same thing with tier 2. If something sits in there for more than 30 minutes and a technician doesn't have a plan to resolution for that ticket, it needs to be escalated up to the final tier. Now, of course, that time limit is going to vary based on the way you run your business and your ticket flow, but that's something to look at and something to consider to make sure that the right tickets are moving through quickly enough to get to the right technician. And then lastly, and based on the poll where you guys have a little bit more time right now, for those tickets that do get escalated, make sure you're documenting them so that you can go back and you can provide some training to tier 1 and tier 2 so that those tickets, those types of tickets, can now be handled in tier 1 again rather than having to wait and be escalated up. The more, obviously, from a profit standpoint, we want to make sure that as much as possible can get done in tier 1 because those resources cost less. But we also want to make sure from a time standpoint that they're getting done as quickly as possible as well.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. I've worked myself with thousands of MSP business owners over the years here since 2004 when I started in the industry, kind of helping them build their programs, pricings, go to markets and such. And something they've all said at one point or another is that they wish they had more time to work on their internal policies and procedures. So hopefully everybody's using some of those suggestions that you've just given. In fact, given the fact that they did say they have a little more time right now. But there's one more area that warrants a discussion on efficiency, and that's how it relates to backup in this work from home environment. So let's finish off the webinar with Eric Harless. Eric, what are some of the considerations that our partners should be thinking about as it relates to efficient backup processes in today's climate?
So a lot of things to think about, Eris. Backup is part of your security model. It's that last line of defense. Once everything else goes wrong, hoping you have a good backup to get your data back. And considering we are working from home now, there's the added chance of ransomware or accidental deletion or hardware failure because you don't have as strict controls on this endpoint or this security border that you would in the corporate office. So one of the first things I'd recommend doing is, from a backup perspective, is segment your customers. Segment the backups of your permanent devices and your temporary devices. That's likely going to mean maybe a different backup target. It could be different schedules, different selections, different retention periods, and maybe you're not doing long-term archiving, things like that. Other thoughts: don't overload your VPN. If you're using a backup solution that would typically send the data back to the home office, up to the mothership, then you look at something that could send you to a local disk or to a cloud, or a combination of those two, that doesn't require you to connect to send a large amount of data over the wire. We talked about using cloud targets for other applications. So moving to things like Office 365, for instance, allows you to do your backup at a cloud-to-cloud level, backup Office 365 in the cloud, not at the device level. So you can stop backing up the email on the individual machines, or the OneDrive, or the SharePoint files, those kind of things. Also, just adjusting the schedules so that if you are going to do backup back to the mothership, or up to the cloud, having those run after hours when you're not in the middle of a video conference or working on peak data times. That way your backups don't fight for that valuable bandwidth that everybody's trying to utilize. Separate user profiles for your work data and your personal information. Lock those profiles so that you don't have your kids coming in wanting to get online to do their classes and actually delete a document, or they want to play a game, something like that. Nip at the bud by separating those and password protecting them. Document all these temporary changes, I guess, and permanent changes, because you want to bill for these things at some point potentially, or you need to roll them back. So proving and documenting what you've done is going to make it a lot easier when you need to revert that solution. Try to look for and prevent those single points of failure. Don't put everything on the same resource. Don't move everything to the cloud. Don't move everything to this one data center. Look at spreading this out amongst your clients, utilizing different types of resources. Office 365, Microsoft experienced this, 775% spike in cloud service demand due to COVID-19. I think there's a link that's here that we can drop into the chat if you guys want to follow up on that article. Think about it, these large data centers, a data center with 2,500 racks and 750 disks per rack. If you look at that and you think about this 2% annual mean time between failure kind of rate, really that means about 100 drives are going to fail every 24 hours, or one drive every 15 minutes. So cloud services, just because they're available and have some redundancy, doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to offer full high availability or full data protection. You still need a copy of the data. You don't want to put all of your eggs in one basket, no matter where that is. There's also some really good questions that are coming through in the chat session. One of those I did want to address before I wrap here, which is there was a question about OneDrive. Is it safe for storing confidential enterprise data? It's a very subjective question, because it depends on the type of confidential data. If it's employee data, if it's health data, if it's bound by any type of regulation, then yeah, maybe OneDrive is not going to be the ideal solution for it, unless you're using a particular Gov cloud, or a Gov, or a particular instance of it. You're really going to have to talk to your customers and their regulations to determine whether they can utilize that type of service. With that said, there are tons and tons of businesses out there that are managing confidential data and storing it on Microsoft-based or cloud-based SharePoints and other services. If it's going through email, then it's probably fine for these type of services, but it's really going to be a judgment call on you and your customer to determine whether it's going to check a box or violate a box.
Awesome, Eric. Thanks. Yeah, and that was pretty much the last question. It looks like we've done a pretty good job answering questions as they were coming in the question panel there. So I'm going to skip over this and go straight to our last poll question. Of course, this one. Everybody knows this one. This is, how did we do? Give us a 5 if you thought this was incredibly valuable. Give us a 1 if you didn't. This will help us dictate whether you guys want to see more of this type of information being created by the team. And such. And of course, I wanted to thank everybody, that's joined us today. Let me flash a quick list of references on the screen as soon as I close this poll for you here, which I will do right now. Okay, and move over to that flash. Okay, so that if you guys wanted to go to any of those resources. Most of these are the ones that we put in the chat as well already. So, don't kill yourself over trying to take a screenshot. You've probably copied them. And with that, that's all the time we have for today. I want to thank the panelists for being here and providing the audience with their knowledge and expertise. I'd also like to especially thank all of you in the audience for taking the time out of your day to join us. I hope you got a lot out of today's session, and hopefully we'll see you again in the coming weeks for more of our webinar sessions designed to provide you with assistance during these unprecedented times. We will be doing webinars almost on a weekly cadence in regards to this stuff for you guys. So if you have any particular topics you want us to cover, going through any of these things, please feel free to email us or let us know. Okay, to view any of the content we have created and been able to post so far, please visit the COVID Hub like we've talked about. There's a link up on screen as well as in the chat. We'll continue to produce more of this as we go, and I will let you guys go and tell you guys to have a great rest of your day. Please, everybody, stay happy, healthy, and safe.